I absolutely adore Mindy McGinnis. Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be talking about A Long Stretch of Bad Days by Mindy McGinnis. Now, to start off, this book hasn't actually been released yet. I was lucky enough to be provided an ARC by NetGalley and HarperCollins Publishing to read this book before it came out in return for an honest review from me. So I kind of went into this book knowing that it wouldn't be something that I necessarily disliked because I just love her writing style so much, so I knew that I would like it somewhat. Also, just a little heads up, I'm not going to be doing any spoilers for this review because since it isn't released yet, I don't want to have any spoilers in this video, but I will talk about things I liked, things I disliked, just very vaguely, so that it doesn't give it away for you guys when you go to read this book, because it really was awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. First things first, I do want to give you a short description of the book before going into my review. So, A Long Stretch of Bad Days is basically about Bristol and Lydia. Lydia Chast. She's from the higher end of society. She's one of those families in a small town that everyone knows. Everyone's like, oh, she's a Chast. She's expected to do things based off of her family name. And Bristol, Bristol Jameson, while she does have expectations for her family name, they are the exact opposite of Lydia's, because Lydia, she's expected to be all butterflies and rainbows, and Bristol is expected to be a teenage high school dropout and get pregnant before she finishes high school. So these two girls both end up in a similar situation when their guidance counselor, who either retired or quit, I don't remember, their guidance counselor in high school didn't put them in the correct credits and courses to graduate, so they're both behind a history credit. Now, Lydia automatically strikes up a deal with administration by using her podcast to talk about some historic things about their family home. And once she gets this deal with administration and she learns that Bristol is also short a credit, she decides to take Bristol under her wing, and they work together to get that credit by using Lydia's podcast. So with this podcast, they decide to look into The Long Stretch of Bad Days, which is a strange name for all the townspeople to describe like a week in time back in history when they had several bad things happen day after day. So that's what they use the podcast for, and that's their historic story. And they basically do a murder investigation and see that their small town has a much darker history than they could have imagined. All right, so that was my short-ish description of the book. We'll go ahead and get into my review. All right, so I really have so much to say about this novel. The vibe that I got from this novel when reading it, I got a Good Girl's Guide to Murder and Truly Devious, which are two of my favorite young adult mystery novels. Reading A Long Stretch of Bad Days by Mindy McGinnis really gave me the vibe that I got from those two books, and I absolutely adored it. Really, like when I finished this book, those are the first two novels that came to mind to compare it to, and it just goes to show you how much I really enjoyed this novel just because of how much I enjoyed those two. If you look at any of my reviews for those two, I am always raving about those two books. So the other thing that I really liked about this novel was that while it's not as gruesome as a lot of Mindy McGinnis's other books, it somehow stayed in between dark and lighthearted, and that's really, really hard to do. I think one character in particular gave this book that lighthearted feel, even though it was very dark in atmosphere and dark in tone. So she is my absolute number one favorite character in the whole book, and she literally stole the show. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, Bristol Jameson. While I empathized a lot with Lydia because I do understand her struggles of having a very specific last name in a small town, especially since I grew up in a small town, people expect so much from you just based off of who your family is. And while I empathized with her, Bristol still stole the show. And the reason for that is the dynamic between Bristol and Lydia, and that Bristol was always there for comic relief when you needed it. Their relationship, Lydia and Bristol's relationship, wasn't perfect. They got into a lot of fights throughout the novel, and they worked through them. So I really, really appreciated that from a standpoint of watching those character arcs. So you don't get this perfect friendship novel because you know that they're both so different, so obviously they wouldn't get along perfectly. And Bristol and Lydia they clashed in the perfect amount, but they also complemented each other so well. And Mindy McGinnis did an amazing job having their characters complement each other and giving this really wonderful dynamic duo throughout the whole entire book. With Lydia, and back to her family issues with having a specific name in a small town, specific last name. Like I mentioned earlier, I really empathize with this because small towns can be brutal, but they're also full of people who will love you despite your flaws if you get to know the people who really care about the small town. The other thing that I really liked about this small town atmosphere in A Long Stretch of Bad Days is that they often stuck together. So it didn't really matter what was happening when they talked about a specific event that happened to their small town. They always talked about their community and how they came together to make it work. And that's really what you see in a lot of small towns. You see people coming together and caring about their community and knowing people by name. And you just don't see that in larger cities because there is just a much bigger population and you can't keep up with people that well. The last thing that I want to talk about in my review is the ending. Like I said, I'm not going to get into any spoilers, so don't freak out. But the ending, in my opinion, was honestly perfect. And I'll give you some reasons why without spoiling it. So you didn't really have too much closure with all of the characters in the book, which I appreciated because I don't like a book that wraps it up into a neat little bow, and that's part of the reason why Mindy McGinnis is one of my favorite authors, because she never wraps it up in a pretty neat little bow. You always get instances of reality and real life because that's just not how things end, because there really isn't a true ending in real life. So it felt very real to me. You didn't get closure with every single character. You did get closure with some characters, but not all of them. The climax and resolution, while not totally unexpected, still gave me a little surprise towards the end. And you definitely get one of those sick and twisty moments that Mindy McGinnis is known for. While I did guess a few things about the novel, I didn't guess all of them about the ending, so there were still parts of it where I was like, wow, okay, mind blown. But yeah, so I really thought the ending was great. You didn't get all of the closure that you would have typically wanted if you wanted a pretty little ending, but I thought that was very fitting. Overall, I can't wait to see what everyone's thoughts are on this book because I did read it so early in advance before it was published. I didn't really get to talk to anybody about it. Mindy McGinnis has done it again with this novel, of course. One thing I want to point out, because I have to mention him, is Uneven Stephen. I mean, can you think of a better pet sidekick? I can't, because he's my favorite. For me, if I were to give A Long Stretch of Bad Days a star rating, it would definitely be 5 out of 5 stars. One of my favorite reads from 2022, even though I couldn't really include it in 2022 because it's a 2023 release. But yes, 5 stars overall. Mindy McGinnis is amazing. So that is my review for A Long Stretch of Bad Days by Mindy McGinnis. I cannot wait for this novel to be published so that I can hear all of your thoughts about it. And I want you to go into detail what you loved, what you didn't like. Did you absolutely adore Bristol like I did? Did you think Uneven Stephen was the cutest? And let me know if you didn't like it and what you didn't like about it. I absolutely love discussing books with people, so please leave me a comment. I want to thank NetGalley and HarperCollins Publishing again for providing me an advanced reader copy to review in return for my honest review. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe because I always post book review videos and other bookish content that you might like to see. I'll see y'all later.